Well, hello everybody. Well, today I'm going to show you how I made a reverse canvas collage mixed media, I guess. As I'm not quite sure how I'm going to call it. But to start off, what I did is I painted the inside of a used canvas that I had, which is 8.5 by 11. And I had some gauze that I had in my stash of mixed media that I used, and I just glued it all the way around with some Curry's medium and varnish matte. I bought this from a Canadian company which is called Curry's, C-U-R-R-Y-S. If you're Canadian, they have their own store of art supplies, mixed media, etc. I glued all that around with this matte medium varnish, and it came out really the way I wanted. The purpose of doing this with the gauze was to add some texture. I did not take the staples out. I just used the canvas as it was reversed, and I just added on that gauze. I wanted a bit of texture since what I'm planning to do is make it a little masculine. Then after that was all dried, which I did dry it with my heat gun, I added some gesso, and the gesso that I used was a Liquidex professional gesso, and again is something that I bought at Curry's. But Curry's also have their own gesso, but it was out of stock when I ordered this a while back. But anyway, Liquitex, when you do put your gesso on, it doesn't matter if you use white or black, if they have them in two colors. I never really use the black a whole lot, but it just takes, depending what you want to do with it. You do not have to cover it like you do if you were going to paint. All you need to do is brush it on. What it does, it seals all the canvas, and so your next steps will adhere to it and not suck into the canvas or the wood or whatever else that is there. Now, after that, I used a mixture of walnut stain and water that I used to kind of vintage style or coffee dye some of my papers when I'm running out of coffee dye paper. And it is very wet. It's liquid, so I sprayed the canvas with that. I thought I'd start with that to see how that turned out. And after I did that, I found that it was very wet to get it to a tone that I liked, but it was a good start anyway. So then after that, I took the actual walnut ink antiquing solution from Sukinito, or Sokineko or something, and I sprayed it. That is directly onto that canvas on top of the watered down version. After I did that, I started using some different Tim Holtz products. I started with some Distress Ink liquid weathered wood, and I just dropped a few drops. I also used the vintage photo. I used the pumice stone, and I just kind of put it here and there, and just kind of dropped it here and there and saturated the canvas and also the texture that I had on there. And I added some blue weathered wood and a bit of forest moss, not too much because I didn't want it to get too dark. Then I took a piece of paper towel and just blotted some off because it was really getting saturated, and I didn't want it to get too wet. But I liked the way it was coming through because the gauze was sucking up most of the liquids. It was making it pretty soaky. So it was an experience. And but I did like the way it came out. Like, it was a good way to start. After I blotted them all out, I went to the Tim Holtz dabbers, and I used up some of his dabbers. I used up the paint distress dabbers that he has. I used the soot color, and I just kind of went all the way around and made it the black soot, and just kind of pounced it everywhere. After I did that, I added a bit of black soot, and I added a bit of walnut stain is what I used after that. Just added here and there and gave it a little bit of oomph, and then I used the picket fence and did the same thing, but didn't use too much of the picket fence because I didn't want it to come out too white. Then I went to his sprays, and I do have this Distress dabbers that I used, and this one here I believe is the black soot that I finished off with. Then I went back to his droppers and added a few drops here and there. Then I had some Stampin' Up! Ink refills that I had, so I figured I'd put some of that in, and the colors that I had was a bit of black, the basic black, and I also had the garden green that I had extra of, so I thought I might as well use some of that up. Then I went back to Tim Holtz squeeze little bottles, and I added some more until I was happy with what I had. It's mixed media is exactly that, is you just go for it until you're happy with what you're coming out with. And I was starting to really be pleased the way things were coming out. The gauze was getting saturated on the level that I wanted. The canvas, I wasn't too worried about the inside of the canvas, because the inside I am going to put something there. But on the outside frame, I was really starting to see it come and be what I wanted it to do. Now this here spray is a metallic spray that I have. I'm not quite sure what the brand is, but it is actually for fabric. But I thought, why not? And I started to spray. What I was trying to mimic there was a little bit of sky for the image that I'm going to put inside, because it is kind of raggedy. Once I got the canvas to where I wanted to, and it was saturated, I took out some of my embossing powder, and right there I am spreading out, just randomly spreading it around, some Tim Holtz Distress powder, embossing powder, and it is called Weathered Wood, and I really enjoyed it. Then I took out some stupendous Age Spice embossing enamel, and I kind of leisurely added some on the canvas also. And then to that I took out some stupendous Age Copper embossing enamel, and I did the same thing and just kind of added it just here and there and everywhere. So as you can tell, it's a little heavy. Normally you would put some Versamark, but I thought, well, with all that ink, it'll probably glue onto it. So then I took my heat gun out and I dried it out. Now, and honestly, it took me about 15 minutes to dry the whole thing out because it was so saturated. But I'm very, very pleased the way it all turned out. It turned out exactly the way my mind would have seen it. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This is the finished product. I added a truck picture that I had, which I have done a tutorial on how I transferred that with some medium matte, and how I transferred it to cardstock, and I added it on, and I added some Tim Holtz nuts and bolts and stuff that I had. And I also had an old chain, so I added that on, and I added some textile with Tim Holtz, some of the fabrics that he brought out. I added a handle on top of the frame. I'm just really thrilled the way it came out. It came out just the way I would have anticipated. I love the texture around the frame. I like the metal. I like the textile. It just gives a whole bunch of different elements together. So I hope you've enjoyed this, because I truly enjoyed making it with you, and I hope you give this a try, because really you can't fail. All you do is you gesso it up and you start again. So this is Yvonne, and I hope you have a crafty day, and I hope you'll give this a try, like I said. And if you do, please drop me a note, because I would just love to see you. I thank you for